Because the next thing Carlos hears is, "You never saw anything. You never saw anything and you need to leave." And he felt like they were ready to shoot him at any moment. They weren't supposed to look at it, they weren't supposed to touch it. It was very strict and it was a very scary place to be in. He brought out a black Ziploc bag, like one of those body bags. The whole place smelled horribly of ammonia and sulfur. So bad actually that they had to close the entire wing of the hospital. She knew it had been tampered with, and unfortunately nothing could stop it from taking his life. In the early hours of the morning, January 13th, Carlos de Souza was driving down an old country road. He was driving to meet up with some friends in order to see an ultralight plane flight demonstration, which I actually did not know what that was until I checked it out today. It seems pretty cool. This guy, Carlos, was driving down this road and he was traveling from Sao Paulo to Minas Gerais, which is a state in Brazil. The state is pretty big in itself. And he stopped. He suddenly stopped. He looked at the sky and he saw something. Up in the sky, just beyond the ridge, there was something coming down. Carlos said he saw smoke. He saw white smoke, which is quite unusual because if you see something coming down, if you see like an engine that's being broken down or something, the smoke is usually black. This smoke was white. Huge speed coming crashing down to the ground. Carlos said he had never seen anything like it. He knew white smoke was not usual, but nothing was usual about that night actually. What Carlos said he saw, was a cigar-shaped object. Carlos said it looked like a minibus in shape. This object had a long crack on its side, from which the smoke was coming from. This craft was apparently wobbling from Carlos's perspective. In an interview, he said it looked like it was shaking like a washing machine. What Carlos did not expect is that object to take a sudden 360 turn and crashed. Carlos got out of his car and he went to investigate, which I don't know if I would have done that if I were in his place, if I'm being honest. That's really brave of him. As soon as he got to the crash site, Carlos said he saw a lot of debris, but it was strange because the debris for an object that large, there wasn't a lot of debris and the debris was pretty small. But what Carlos noticed immediately after getting there was a very strong smell in the area. Stronger than, I don't know, anything usual. It was a smell of ammonia, maybe mixed with sulfur. He said the smoke was so strong he had to cover his nose. He then went to pick up a piece of the debris he found. He found out that the debris was actually very light. Extremely light. It looked like aluminum foil. It was like a tiny, very thin sheet of aluminum foil, which Carlos did not expect. If this thing was some sort of drone, and by the way, this is 1993, so even by 1993 standards, a drone was pretty wow. I'm not even sure if drones were invented at that time, but whatever Carlos saw, it was not anything of that time, basically. This thing looked like very thin aluminum foil, but when he scrunched it up in his hands, the foil just reverted back to its original shape, like it had never been disturbed in the first place. Just minutes after Carlos just hung around there, the place was filled with military and police alike. There were military trucks everywhere, probably followed by a few police cars. Of course, they were already circling the area and they were trying their best to shoot him, basically, or just scare him away. Because the next thing Carlos hears is, "You never saw anything. You never saw anything and you need to leave." And these people had big guns. Carlos said they were ready. They were pointing at him with the guns and he felt like they were ready to shoot him at any moment. So he bounced. He didn't stay around to get shot, basically. He bounced. He drove away thinking that whatever he saw, he knew it had to be kept secret. He knew he couldn't really speak about it that much. The police and the military didn't tell him much. They just shoot him away. I'm pretty sure Carlos tried to ask a few questions, but he was just interrupted. They didn't want to listen to him, of course, because if the military is there, then you know it's serious. But what Carlos did not know, which he didn't know a lot, by the way, what he did not know is that more people than he thought experienced this same thing. Like just a few meters from where he was, just beyond the ridge, there stood a farm. So Orlina was just sleeping peacefully when she suddenly just felt something was wrong. She heard the animals outside of her house just going crazy. The animal farms, of course, but which they would usually make noise, but at 12 a.m. that seems pretty sketchy. So she just went out to check it out. Maybe it was a fox, I don't know, something was clearly disturbing them. Orlina went to check out her animals, see if everything is fine, if they need anything at all. But there was no fox there. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, but the animals were pretty damn disturbed. Orlina approached the fence, because of course the place was fenced up. And that's when she saw white smoke. Okay, what is it? I don't know. Orlina had no clue what she was looking at. It was bus-shaped. She said it was the size of a bus or the size of a minibus, which is the same thing Carlos said. She said the thing looked like it had a gash or it was just ripped open on its side, and that's where a lot of smoke was coming from, just like Carlos said. Orlina saw this thing going down. She said it was struggling to keep altitude, and it eventually just gave out and went down. Orlina had no idea what she was looking at, and neither her husband when he came behind her. But they were both pretty astonished, and in the end, left thinking that they might have just witnessed a UFO crash right near their house. What they both didn't know is that they were about to witness an experience and be part of an extreme event known as the Varginha Incident. Varginha is one of the biggest, I'm pretty sure, cities in Brazil. Right now it has about 130,000 people, population. But I'm pretty sure in 1993 it was a bit lower. Varginha is situated in Minas Gerais. It's about, I'm not really certain if it's in the middle of the state, but it's about near the middle of the state, basically. And it's been one of the most important cities regarding coffee production in the world, actually. Brazil is known for its coffee, but Varginha is one of the biggest cities in which coffee is produced. Good coffee, by the way, because Brazil is, they got coffee there. They got really good coffee. So it was a pretty big shock when people learned something serious went down in Varginha. Like, UFO activity? What? Criminal activity wasn't very high in Varginha, so people just didn't expect anything crazy to happen there. But there was a military base pretty close to Varginha, about 20 miles away. The ESA military base, which also acted as a school, by the way, as a military school for training, where people started noticing strange things there. You wouldn't see a lot of, let's say, Navy or Air Force people there because it was usually just training grounds for the infantry. But something weird happened one day when a whole helicopter came down with a whole ton of military personnel, Navy personnel to be specific, because this is really important. People were not expecting Navy people to come there because there wasn't any need for it. One witness saw Navy people just getting out of the helicopter, telling people, go away, just make space for us, please. They brought out of this helicopter a whole box. This witness was an ex-military personnel who came out 26 years later, so about 2022. In 2022, I believe, he came out and talked about his experience there. He worked at the ESA base, so he knew a lot of stuff, but he did not know about this Navy operation that was going on there. I'm not sure, but there was about maybe less than 10 Navy people. And they were commanding everyone in that building to just get out, make space for us, because this is really important. Don't touch the box. Don't even try to take a look at it, because it's not for you to look at, basically. Soon after the Navy people appeared, rumors started spreading around. Apparently there had been a secret operation in Virginia that many people were not told about. And this, there were about 2 trucks sent to Virginia, I believe. They retrieved something. They were not sure what, but they knew that they retrieved something pretty secret. People were already starting to speculate that whatever was in that box was whatever they retrieved from Virginia, which would make a lot of sense. This guy, the witness, the ex-military dude, he's a His squadron was actually involved in this Varginha incident. They were the drivers of the trucks. So he had a little bit of an insight of what was going on, but he did not know that it would turn into such a big deal. These drivers would really soon just disappear. Like right after the operation, they were brought into the offices apparently to have a talk, and they were never seen of again, which was weird because they would say goodbye. They would say their goodbyes to their comrades, leave a message or something if they were to just leave, or I don't know, get transferred, anything like that. But no, they just disappeared. So the witness guy thought it was extremely weird, but then he got really panicked when his captain disappeared also. This dude, the captain, he apparently was a really nice guy. He was really talkative. He would have said something if he were to disappear, but no, he was just gone. But let's take it back a little bit, because not everything is about the ESA. Sure, the ESA saw a lot of strange stuff, and the military would be extremely involved in this case. But there were strange things happening in the city before the trucks arrived, and before the drivers and the captain went missing. The police station started getting reports of an animal or several animals around the city, in the bushes, in the parks, making a lot of noise and just being a general disturbance, which was pretty normal. I mean, things like foxes, wolves getting into the city might be a little bit out of the sudden, like not very much a normal, but I mean, it was nothing, I guess, crazy to think about. So a group of firefighters were dispatched. The firefighting brigade was dispatched to just check on the area and see if something happened. Well, basically, they got to the place where a lot of people reported this animal or whatever it was just making a lot of noise. And what they saw was not an animal. There was a really small black creature over there just huddled in a bush, basically. This black creature was pretty oily. People said it looked oily. It had really big eyes, really big red eyes, and it looked terrified. Now there's actually witnesses of this, apparently. There was a guy who said when the firefighters captured this thing, because I'm pretty sure there was a pretty big commotion over there. There were people watching from a distance and all of that. This guy said that he heard the scream of a child, basically. This thing was screaming like a little kid. They all knew this was not an animal. From what I understood, they just threw a net over it, captured it, and put it in the truck and just left. That would be known as the first capture of the Varginha incident. And remember, people saw this live with their own two eyes, or so they say. Now, why did I say the first? Because apparently there's a second capture, and this one is much more relevant. Like, a lot more people heard of this. So 3 girls by the names of Lilian, Valkyria, and Katya were walking through an alleyway back to Valkyria's house, most probably because she was the first one in front. They decided to go through an alleyway, which is kind of like a private property. This place was a bricked up, walled private property, but it also acted as an alleyway because there wasn't really anything in there. Like a connective space between a street and another. Here's the street, here's the other, and this is the private property. From what I understand, this was the property of one of the girls' aunts or uncles, so they were allowed to pass through there. But yeah, they used it as an alleyway. But what they did not expect that day was to meet an alien in the alleyway. Valkyria was the first one to pass. She was walking, not really paying much mind to where she was going, because I'm pretty sure she was used to this part of town already. She took a peek at it and it seemed weird. Like, it was brown, like brown almost to black. And it resembled a child in form. Like, it was pretty small and it was huddled up. Now, she did not know what she was looking at. For a split second, it did not make any sense. So she just stopped. She stopped to take a better look at it for just a few seconds, maybe 4 seconds, when she saw a pair of big red eyes staring back at her. She saw the eyes weren't red as in bloodshot red, but they were red as in a kind of deeper maroon, I would say, color. It was extremely oily. It had a few bumps on his head, like on the front and on the sides. It had like what we would call lumps, what we would call maybe cysts, but they appeared pretty natural to it. They said this being did not have any nose or mouth that they could really discern. They saw a slit for a mouth, but it was barely even there, and no nose, basically. Now, when Valkyria saw these beings' eyes, she said it would look weird. Like, it did not look frightened, like in the sense of wanting to attack. Valkyria ran. She ran. As soon as she saw these beings' eyes on whatever, she thought she saw a demon. So she just took off running to her house, with the girls just following behind her. Now, the other 2 girls, they were just as scared as her, but they were much more willing to go back and check whatever they saw, just to see if what they saw was real or not, because they just had a couple of seconds to look at it. It seems pretty real to them, but you know, they were shocked. They were still in shock. And they actually took a truck. They went back there with Don Luisa, by the way, who is a pretty big part of this story. They went back to the alleyway to check if the being was still there. It wasn't, of course. It had already been like 40 minutes, maybe an hour since they left. There was nothing there except a footprint, which Donna Luisa saw. So that's when she knew these girls actually saw something. Like, it wasn't just their imagination, because I'm pretty sure they told her, we saw a demon. like kids would, right? But no, there was a whole footprint there in the mud, right where the girls described this being was, next to the wall. So she went to take a look at it. Apparently the footprint had 3 fingers, just 3, which was already kind of crazy. Apparently the middle finger was much larger than the other 2. But what Donna Luisa said is she couldn't get out of her nose, out of her head, out of her clothes to smell. It smelled like pure, strong ammonia coupled with sulfur. The smell was disgusting. It was strong, it was overbearing. And it took days until she could get it out of her nose. Just like Carlos said. Carlos described the craft smelling like sulfur and ammonia. And this is going to be a factor, because a lot of people smell this, apparently. And it's pretty damn interesting, because these people had no connection. And they all said it smelled like ammonia, strongly of ammonia. Let me drink, because I'm talking too much. But the creature was basically gone. Or so they thought. Because in reality, what happened is this being left, it ran probably for its life. Until making it just a block away, basically. And coming face to face with the military police. That same day, Marco Ceres and Eric Lopez were making their rounds in the car. Eric was driving the car and Marco was just chilling in the inside. They had a pretty good relationship. Like, Eric got well with Marco, and Marco was a pretty fun guy to hang around with, so it was okay. Like, they were having fun. Until they stumbled across something interesting. Eric stopped the car. Like, he hit the brakes full on. Marco went just, what the fuck are you doing? Because it was a pretty abrupt stop. But Eric stopped because there was something in the way. That something was the small creature the girl saw earlier. They did not know what they were looking at, especially because they almost just crashed into it. So it would have been much worse if Eric just hadn't stopped right then and there. When Marco got out of his car, Marco was the first one to get out. He was the one to take initiative, basically. He got out of the car and he approached the creature pretty slowly and cautiously, of course. This was not an animal by any means, so he had to be prepared, probably with gun in hand and everything. He got to the creature, which apparently didn't even... I sound like that kid on...
Because apparently you're spinning around, and apparently every time you get dizzy.
The creature must have been pretty hurt, because it didn't put up much of a fight. Marco was really... it was really easy to restrain it, basically. Marco did not have any tough time. He didn't have to fight with it or wrestle with it. He just put it to the ground, took it in his arms, in his car, and drove it to the nearest hospital. Because this being looked like it needed help. It was barely walking. It was mostly limping. It looked scared out of its life. So Marco did the right call, taking it to the hospital. And I'm pretty sure Eric was on par with it. This creature was extremely oily, and it smelled strongly of sulfur. The oil got all over his clothes, all over his skin. He didn't really think much of it because, well, it was just something bad smelling. Like, Marco would just wash off and get it over with, right? Well, no, because unfortunately, Marco would develop a very serious infection just a few days after, which would take on a few weeks to fully develop. And 3 weeks after he met the creature, Marco would die at a hospital because of an unknown infection. Now, Marco's family, tried to contact Eric about the whole situation because they knew the whole ordeal, of course. Marco had told them what happened. The family couldn't contact Eric. Nobody could, actually. Eric had disappeared. He was nowhere to be found, just like the drivers, the military drivers, the captain. Nobody could reach Eric at all. And while Marco was on his basically deathbed, his sister was the one taking over basically the case of the Varginha Incident, and she would take to private researchers and ufologists to tell his story. During the time that Marco was sick, he was not allowed to talk about what had happened what he met, what he saw, what he took to the hospital, or actually the Varginha incident at all. He was not allowed to talk about any conspiracy theories, any theories of his own, or the fact that he was probably sick because of it. After he died, his sister, his family basically tried retrieving the medical reports, which should have been given to them, of course, except that they were asking money for the medical records. They said, no, we're not gonna pay money for the medical records of our deceased family member. We wanna know why he died. We just wanna see what happened with him. What they eventually received the medical reports, but his sister said they were ripped. Like, there were entire pages gone from the medical report. She knew it had been tampered with. Once they got the medical reports and they could see, just basically they could see the bigger picture of what happened, they noticed that whatever was in his system, whatever made him sick, it was described as an unknown substance, which probably caused the infection. One of the doctors that was treating Marco said in a later interview, like years later, he had never seen anything like it. He had never seen an infection of that type. It wasn't a fast developing infection. It took a couple, maybe more than a couple of weeks to bring Marco's immunity system down. But that thing destroyed his immunity system bit by bit. He did not know what was happening, and neither did the doctors. And unfortunately, nothing could stop it from taking his life. Now, ufologists and researchers weren't the only ones who were talking about this case, which were already in full vogue by the time that the creatures were captured. They were taking interviews of random people on the streets, asking what they had what they had seen. Of the 3 girls who actually described the creature to them, hired an artist and later publicized this picture. But very importantly, the local press was very intrigued about this case. They were all into it. They had already a scope prepared. They were just waiting to get more information on it and ready to release the story. In particular, 2 guys at this local TV station, they planned to go to the ESA base. These people went to the ESA base to ask questions, which is very brave of them. They met this guy, this military guy. I'm pretty sure it was a general. And they started questioning him right at the gates, by the way, of the ESA military base, which is already wow. Because I'm pretty sure if you were to go to a military base right now and just ask questions, you wouldn't be taking into account. But yeah, this guy actually started asking some questions. But when they got to the meat of the thing, when they got to the Varginha incident, to the UFO, to the creatures, silence. The guy went back inside to talk with his colleagues, came back a few minutes after and told them, you have to forget all about this. You're not allowed to make a story on this ever, or release any information on this ever. If you do, you're gonna get arrested. Like, straight up, you will be arrested if you continue asking questions or if you continue talking about the incident. The guys went back with their tails in between their legs because they were pretty sure if they were to release a story about this, they'd get arrested. So there was really nothing they could do. But that didn't stop people from talking because, listen, these people at the ESA base, they were all over the town. By the time the first and the second creature were captured, there were military trucks all over the city. Police was crazy. And a few streets had already been blocked. There were a group of witnesses who came out in an interview Basically the same day that the streets were blocked, they got out of the gym. They had just gotten out of the gym. They were walking home. It was a group of friends, by the way. And they suddenly met this blockade, this military blockade. They were pretty rebellious because they were like, no, I'm gonna pass. And the military was like, you're not. This is a restricted area. You're not passing. Now this was a really big deal for the city and for the case in general, because if the military had nothing to hide and there was actually no creature involved or anything like that, why would there be a ton of military police just hanging around the area and blocking parts of the city off? It made practically no sense to the ufologists who were just spreading the news like crazy. One of these witnesses is a radiologist technician, I guess, who worked at the regional hospital. So he said one day he was just minding his own business when a military truck from the ESA base, they knew it was specifically from the ESA base, stopped in front of the regional hospital. They got out and brought in a box. They were telling people, just get out of the way, but we need help with this, basically. And we need to keep this as secret as possible, so let's just hurry it up. The room was already filled with doctors who were there to help and nurses, but not a lot because they really wanted this to be kept low-key. They brought out a black Ziploc bag, like one of those body bags. They brought it out, they placed it on a table, and they told him, the technician guy, please help us take x-rays of this. They wanted x-rays of skull, the cervical spine, the thorax, the abdomen, the pelvis, the legs, and the arms. Only those places in specific, and they wanted them fast. So the technician did his job. He took the x-rays without taking a peek within the body bag. Nobody was allowed to touch it. So the military dudes were keeping everyone away from the bag. They weren't supposed to look at it. They weren't supposed to touch it. It was very strict and it was a very scary place to be in. They did their x-rays, but they were not allowed, the doctors were not allowed to take a look at the pictures. The military just took the picture, took the bag, took the box, and left. Just like that. But they weren't allowed to question it because it was the police and the military, so figures. Like, we can't question anything like that. But this guy, the technician, who actually came out and told this story to the people, said things were just weird in a sense that they brought this duffel bag, this Ziploc bag. Things were weird because of the smell. The whole place smelled horribly of ammonia and sulfur. So bad actually that they had to close the entire wing of the hospital and just deep clean it for days. Like days, because the smell wouldn't leave the walls and they wouldn't leave their noses for days either. So it was really strong. Just like all the other guys said, like Carlos and Donna Luisa, not this radiologist, they all smelled ammonia. So it's pretty clear by this point that whatever was in that bag was probably one of those creatures. But one thing is for sure. The military was present in Virginia, and apparently they weren't really afraid of intimidating the people, let's say that. Or actually the government wasn't afraid of intimidating people into shutting up. Taking it back to Carlos, as soon as he left, he bolted out of there after he saw the crash. Carlos stopped at a local gas station. He just wanted to refuel, and he also wanted to chill out and just catch his breath because he was shook. he was pretty shaken up by the government showing up the military and the fact that he probably saw a UFO crash right in front of his eyes. He stopped, he grabbed his coffee, maybe even a snack. He just wanted to chill. And he was fueling his car, just chilling for a bit. He saw a car parking near him. A dark colored car, midnight blue, kind of like that. He didn't pay much mind. He was just in his own thoughts, thinking about what he saw. Thinking about what he's gonna tell his friends, actually. He didn't pay much mind to the car until two people got out of it. These two men, were dressed in all black, like really neat suits. Carlos said they looked really neat and really tall. Ties and everything. They came up to Carlos and they said, "Are you Carlos Souza? Is your wife so-and-so? You have a daughter named so-and-so." And they were basically telling him details about his private life to his face as a confirmation, like, we know who you are. Carlos reacted appropriately. He said, "Who the f are you? What do you want from me? How do you know all of this?" Now he was pretty damn scared, but he was still like, "What are you talking about? You saw nothing about the crash. You are not allowed to speak to anyone about this, because if you will, your life is going to turn very weird." Like, that's exactly the words Carlos heard from these guys. Your life is going to turn very weird if you don't shut up about it. Carlos was petrified, like, what happened? The guys just took off, got into the car, and left. That's when Carlos got a better look at the car and saw it didn't have a license plate at all. It was blank. He apparently spoke to his friends and family, but was heavily ridiculed. When he came out, Moment of Contact documentary, he started crying because he was like, "I know this happened, I know where it happened, and I've been ridiculed for it my entire life." It was pretty heartbreaking, to be honest. The second person to be intimidated by the government was none other than Donna Luisa, which is a hero, a national hero, if you ask me. She's such a cool lady. Donna Luisa was just chilling at her home. She had already given a ton of interviews, and they had already commissioned an artist to draw the creature and all of that. The three kids and Donna Luisa were at the front of the Varginha Incident. Like, they were the ones pioneering it, basically. It was 9 p.m. It was a pretty chill evening when he heard a knock on the door. He was like, who would come at the door at 9 p.m.? Maybe another researcher wanting to take an interview. She went over, opened the door without hesitation, and saw four men dressed in black. Just like the ones who came after Carlos. Really nice attire, like black suits, really tall, tie and everything, pristine looking. They came in, all four of them. They basically kind of shoved themselves in, closed the door after them, locked it. One of them had a briefcase with them. Another was holding one of those notepad. Another had a notepad in his hands, and the other were just chilling. Donna Luisa noticed something about them the moment they started speaking. They were actually foreigners. They weren't Brazilian. Maybe because of the accent, maybe because of the way they carried themselves, but they were not from around there. She was pretty damn sure they could have been Americans. They opened the briefcase. There was a ton of money. It was filled up with money. They said, you can only use this money outside of Brazil. And the only thing you have to do to take it is to make sure your child, her friends, and you yourself just don't speak about this incident ever again. Just shut up about it. You can take the money, you can leave. Because she knew her kid, had already been involved in the case. She had already given her statement. she knew the kids saw something, and she herself saw something. So she didn't want to tarnish her reputation and her kids' reputation and possibly brand them as liars. So she said, no, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. The guys continued, like, they insisted, you can take the money. Shut up about it, just take the money and leave. She refused. She was very strong in her beliefs. She didn't want to take the money. She didn't want to even listen to them. They started getting frustrated. They started pushing the money in her direction, urging her to just take it and just so they could leave. She didn't budge. Suddenly, the four men got up. The briefcase was closed. By the way, the person with the notepad, he was writing down a lot of details about their interaction. Donna Luisa could not see what he was writing, but everything she said was probably transcribed, and a lot more. They got up, they left, they slammed the door behind them, and never came back. Donna Luisa knew she had just spoken with some government officials, and they were probably not from Brazil. They were probably United States officials. At this point, the Varginha incident had really gone off the rails. There were people talking about it within Brazil, outside of Brazil. There was researchers everywhere. So the government basically had to do something. The military took it in their own hands to release a 1,000-page report, which that's huge, talking about the entire days of the Varginha incident, what they were doing, what had really happened from their perspective, and what was supposed to be happening in the future. They basically said, we have nothing to hide. Like, we have nothing to hide. The whole military thing within the city was training, because the ESA is a training school, so of course we're gonna do training in the city. We're just training. The whole blockade situation was part of the training, and there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Whatever people saw in the city was nothing more than just their own imagination or a wild animal, because there have been a lot of reports of just an animal or perhaps more animals hanging around the city and causing trouble that day. Now, within the reports, they did state that the reason why the hospital wing was closed down, remember the hospital with the whole radiation situation, the whole x-ray situation, the wing was closed down because they needed to bring new equipment. And they just needed to sterilize the whole wing in order for this equipment to be brought in and be effective. And the equipment was actually brought in stainless steel capsules. And you remember Marco, right? The policeman who died? Well, apparently within the report, he wasn't even working that night. He wasn't on job, he wasn't on duty. That's how they made it seem, like he wasn't working at all, so there was no way he could have died because of something happened to him. The reason he had died was because of a cyst that he had on his arm, which had just gotten infected, and it brought his immunity system down. Now, this is all within their reports. You can take it as facts or you can take it as not facts, because a lot of people still believe the report, even though it is 1,000 pages long and extremely detailed, is just a major cover-up, which is very possible. Now, the one thing that is a known fact is that after the whole Varginha incident, the town actually took it upon themselves to make the whole incident a tourist attraction. They actually have mini statues, they're pretty yay high, I'd say, of aliens all over the town, all over the city. They also have a pretty big structure with a saucer UFO on top, and it's become a part of their culture. Like the Varginha incident, aliens, come check it out. So yeah, whatever you like to believe, the Varginha incident was huge, and if you want to believe in UFOs, that's a perfect place to start searching. Now, I would like to give a huge thanks to the producers of the Moment of Contact documentary, which actually they actually found Eric, you know, the guy who had disappeared, Marco's friend. They found him. They tried to give him an interview, but it wasn't up to it. He looked scared for his life. He said he couldn't give an interview because he didn't even really talk, because he was afraid he'd get into trouble. He was like, no, I can't talk about it or I'll get into trouble and you'll also get into trouble. It was very standoffish. The producers tried everything their best to take an interview out of him or from him, but they just couldn't get him to talk until he threatened with gunfire if they didn't leave him alone, at which point they just bounced. A lot of people said that the fact that Eric said on camera that he couldn't speak about the incident because he was afraid is fact that it happened, while others really just say that he probably was bothered by these people. He probably had to give tons of interviews before from the local press, independent researchers, ufologists and all that, and he just wanted to be left alone. So, you know, there's both sides of the story and you never know. But thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you've learned something about the Varginha incident, which is really cool and one of the biggest UFO stories out there. Thank you very much for hanging out with me. I hope you liked this video. Please take care and stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.